If this goes on, don't panic. Bringing hope to the world through speculative fiction.
Hello and welcome to episode 26. In this episode, we speak with author and Solarpunk, Andrew Dana Hudson. Diane, how's it going?
Pretty good, Alan. Busy. We're in the process of finalizing the details. We finally found a house, and it's all paid for. We had our inspection today. Apparently, the inspector was really impressed. Next time I talk to you guys, I will be in my own house, in my own office.
Nice. That is awesome.
And how about you? How are things going on your end?
So busy. Insanely busy. So, I was buying a large thing today. I was out shopping for cars, and I think we found one. And we haven't signed anything yet, but, we were at the car lot for like 3 hours today. And it's going to be a hybrid, which is cool.
Awesome. So on theme for today. We decided too that our next car is going to be a hybrid, so that's awesome. Nice.
That's kind of where we were. We were like, our next car is going to be either a hybrid or electric. We got pretty good infrastructure around here for an electric. After reviewing everything, it's not quite as good as I would like it to be yet, but it's pretty good around here. But we weren't really willing to make that jump yet, but we definitely went with the hybrid and super excited about that. So I was driving around, it's so quiet, you just like turn it on, and I wasn't sure if it was on yet,
Nice. Yeah, they put in a bunch of charging stations like last year here in our town, and it's not really getting a lot of attention, and I'm not sure why, but one project of the Canadian government for infrastructure building was that our Highway 1, right, our big Trans-Canada highway that goes right through the country, right? They have made sure that there are charging stations wherever they will be needed along the entire length of the highway.
Oh, that's awesome. So, well, that's way more intense than what we've got. I will say Pittsburgh is nice and is pretty progressive and forward-looking. And we just drove by a huge charging station at this gas station. It's the biggest thing I've ever saw. There was probably 10 slots for cars.
Nice.
Yeah, it was huge. But unfortunately, that is across the city from us. We're on the side that apparently doesn't have that many. There is like one up at the gas station up the road from us, but that's the only one I know of that's like close by. So we're not quite there yet, I don't think, but we're really close.
Well, that's why it's still got to be a hybrid in some places. And you can't, I was a little nervous about going full electric because were there enough charging stations? And there are some, like that is Highway 1, but, Highway 16, maybe not so much, right?
Right.
And I like driving there because there's places I like to visit. So do what we can and, hopefully the world moves towards more greener technologies, right?
Yeah. I'm also getting ready to test for my yellow belt in karate.
Ooh, good for you.
Yeah. So my kid got his black belt pretty recently. I can't remember if I've talked about that on the podcast or not, but
you did.
Yeah. So he got his black belt, and I've been kind of like following behind him, and he like gets to teach me, and he gets a huge kick out of it. But so him and I've been practicing for my yellow belt test, which is next week, and so I've been spending a lot of time doing that lately too.
I'm sure you will do just fine.
Yeah, they're pretty laid back. I gotta say, they actually have different standards for adults than they do kids.
Yep.
Which is
fun.
They do. But it is still mostly geared towards the kids. But the last time I actually got like really nervous and started forgetting things. I don't know that I could do perfectly normally on my own, any other time. But as soon as I got into the testing format, I was like, oh. And I'm usually someone who's like really good at testing. I usually am just like, okay, whatever, bring the test on, I do it, boom, done. But for some reason, I don't know, karate testing like freaks me out.
Well, okay, so I've spoken before about how I was the clumsy kid, the clumsy smart kid, the stereotypical nerd, right? So everyone used to make fun of me when I screwed up in anything physical. So I still have trauma issues about that. And I overthink things all the time, right? Especially when it matters, like a test like that. But truthfully, I really like that kind of personal exercise. I do yoga, I do some martial arts, yeah. So no, don't worry. Just take a breath and you'll be good.
I know. I need you to follow me around for the rest of my life and just tell me that, Diane.
Okay. All right.
Oh, and another thing I wanted to bring up is we have a new person working on the podcast.
Right. Yes, we should tell people about this.
Right. So Jasmine Gielink is going to be helping us out. Right now, she's been doing transcripts for us, which is fantastic. She's going to be helping out on the production side as well, and slowly easing into that spot. And then hopefully when Joan gets better, then Jasmine and Joan can trade off a little bit there. Or maybe they can just take me out of the editing and production totally. I'd be okay with that too.
That would be cool. Well, good. And yeah, welcome aboard, Jasmine. I'm really looking forward to transcripts. That's something we've been wanting to do from episode 1. So
Absolutely. Yeah. Super excited about that. And I can't wait to start getting those up. We actually have some already put together. We just haven't put them up yet, and so those should be going up probably before this podcast comes out. So everyone start looking for those. We're going to kind of move forward and backwards at the same time, so we'll be getting out a little bit every month.
Awesome.
So are we ready for our guest?
I think we are.
Okay, fantastic. So again, our guest is Andrew Dana Hudson, and when we come back, we'll have him on. Solarpunk Futures is a podcast about building radically hopeful futures through storytelling and exploration of the solarpunk genre. The podcast features readings of science fiction stories, poetry, and articles published in Solarpunk magazine, as well as interviews with authors, activists, artists, futurists, and others from the solarpunk community who are envisioning and actively creating a better future. You can find Solarpunk Futures anywhere you listen to podcasts. You can also listen directly on our website at solarpunkmagazine.com. And we're back. Today our guest is Andrew Dana Hudson. He is a speculative fiction writer, sustainability researcher, and futurist. His stories have appeared in Slate Future Tense, Lightspeed Magazine, Vice, Terraform, MIT Technology Review, Grist, and many more. His 2015 essay on the political dimensions of solarpunk has helped define and grow the solarpunk subgenre. He is a member of the cursed 2020 class of the Clarion Workshop. He lives in Tempe, Arizona. Welcome, Andrew.
Thanks. Good to be here.
Thanks for coming. And I should mention, you recently did an interview with Solarpunk Magazine, too.
Yeah, a little email exchange. I think it's up already. I mostly talk a little bit about the book that I have coming out, and I guess by the time this drops, it'll already be out, and a little bit about how I got into solarpunk as a movement or a genre, and kind of where I come from in trying to define some of the terms or think about things like what is a solarpunk future. So,
well, this gives us 3 great places to start, actually. Let's talk about, I think maybe we'll start there. What defines a solarpunk future? What were your thoughts on that?
Well, I actually try to avoid using the phrase, which is, what I go into in this interview is, for me, solarpunk is about imagining not a particular kind of future, but a particular kind of counterculture, right? That is able to take the stuff of the technological upheaval that we are starting to go through and hopefully will continue in a positive direction away from the fossil fuel apparatus that we built out all over the planet and towards one that is powered more by photons, by wind, and all these other renewable sources, and kind of imagines an aesthetic and a sort of set of values that could emerge from, kind of the people on the street who get their hands on this stuff and push it beyond where I think it would go on its own. So I don't think we often talk about how, like, let me put it like this. The comparison I like to make is to cyberpunk, right? But we did kind of end up in the cyberpunk future. But most of us don't get to be cyberpunks now that we are here, right? Like, most of us are not cool, badass, like hackers or street samurai or any of these things. We're just cyber proles who live under the boot heel of the algorithms and the megacorps and the plutocrats.
Oh my
right?
God, I love that so much.
So that's why I a little resist saying, like, oh, what's a solarpunk future going to look like, right? Because for me, the solarpunk future is kind of the one that, like, we have just on deck right now. It's going to be more precarious in terms of our relationship to capitalism and the economy. It's going to be more dangerous in terms of the climate. There's just going to be a lot of breakdown and institutional decay and failure. And that's why you need solar punks, right? That's why you need a movement, a counterculture to push back against that. So, I think a lot of people go to solar punk and like it because it's sort of an opportunity to exercise utopian thinking. And I'm all for that. It's just kind of not quite the angle that I take.
I like that. I like that more practical view. It's interesting because I keep saying, and I've said it before, we are living in the cyberpunk dystopia we tried to warn you about. And some people took it as the cautionary tale that it was supposed to be, and some people took it as an instruction manual. So I kind of like the recognition over the fact that talking about solarpunk ideas doesn't necessarily mean that the whole world is going to embrace it right away, and we're going to have to be more personally invested, I guess, about how we try to bring those elements into more common use.
So, Andrew, you were talking about what the future might look like, and in your book, you kind of go into the 5 different futures, actually. You have kind of like a middling future, which seemed to me like the least far-fetched of them all. Far-fetched is the bad word, but it's science fiction, And then there's 3 in the middle that are kind of like, okay, shit has gone really bad generally. And then you've got one at the end where things are, things have gone more positively, right? Actually, it was very like a Ghost of Christmas Present, Ghost of Christmas Future kind of.
Yeah, I like that. I tried to string them together into a narrative, and I didn't actually put them in the order that they are numerically, because all these sequences are based on a set of scenarios used by the IPCC and other sort of climate modelers and scientists called the shared socioeconomic pathways that really try to do a better job than previous generations of climate modeling, of entangling and laying out our assumptions about how growth and population and culture and sort of social dynamics are all, and economic choices are all entangled with emissions and what climate future we end up getting, right? So I read these and thought, well, these are science fiction stories, and I could kind of bring them to life a little bit. But if I did them 1 through 5, I think it'd be a little less. I couldn't call it a novel, right? Because I did want it to have start with the familiar, which is SSP2, and then sort of go through these a little more kind of dire or different futures, and then give a happy ending. But I guess what you were saying about apocalypse versus, or not apocalypse, about dystopia versus utopia, I've been thinking a lot today about how this book is my attempt to, I guess, contextualize some utopian thinking and dystopian thinking, right? Because both of them, I think, can sort of flatten our sense of how things unfold, right? If we're given a future and we're like, well, that's going to suck. Like, I don't know what, like, can't even look forward to that. Or like, oh, phew, man, like the future is going to be great. Can't wait for it, right? Both of those are sort of sap us of our agency.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wanted to do a book that was not either the traditional climate dystopia nor the solarpunk climate utopia, but instead kind of offered all the choices, right? And, showed that for every, utopian sustainability scenario we get to, there's like 4 or 5 other ones in which we don't.
Right. Your scenarios are all very different. Yeah, let's just go through them really quickly, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
And also, I want to mention, you kind of change your writing style in each one as well. That's something I also want to bring up.
Yeah, I think it was really important to me that each of the sections had a kind of distinct style and vibe. And in some ways, they're also just trying to like highlight facets of the problem as it already exists, mm-hmm. right? Like, I don't know, maybe we should go back and offer just like a couple bits of context. So the book Our Shared Storm is set at COP 60, mm-hmm. right? So we just had COP 26 in Scotland, in Glasgow.
And just for everyone out there, what is that exactly?
Yeah, so the COP is the Conference of the Parties. It is the Conference of the Parties to the United Nations Convention on Climate Change, right? That's sort of the big overarching treaty structure mm-hmm. that brings together all the countries of the world pretty much to try and figure out what we're going to do about climate change. And so they have a COP every year, and for the last 26, 27 years or so. And that's, depending on where the city, that's held. If there are major agreements struck, that's where you get things like the Paris Accords, or, previous to that, there was Kyoto. And, for now we have the Glasgow Pact, right? I mean, I'm not sure it's so distinct from Paris that people have called it a separate one, but this is all this is climate diplomacy, right? This is sort of the inside baseball of how these treaties and these targets get made, and how a lot of climate funding moves around the world, right? Because a big part of these negotiations is about rich countries promising to deliver money to poor countries who are going to suffer the worst effects of climate change. I mean, we're all going to suffer pretty bad effects of climate change, but definitely the poorer you are, the less easy it is to pay your way through it, to be able to create the infrastructure and repair the damage and so on. And a lot of them feel like...
If I might jump on a soapbox for 2
please.
seconds, right? One of the problems, I think, is that rich countries seem to be going into these negotiations with this belief that, oh, yeah, it's not really going to affect this as much here. They're treating it like a pandemic or something, where they figure they have the resources to handle it. So they're not as invested in the solving of the problems as I think they should be. And I'm here to tell you, I live in the Okanagan Valley, and this year we had a heat dome, and then all the major highways flooded out in the winter, like all of them. And our mail service went to crap, and our delivery service went to crap. And there were supply problems in the stores that had nothing to do with the pandemic. And that was all direct climate change. So this is Canada, my friends. We are a G8 country. If it can affect us, it doesn't matter where the hell you are, it can affect you. So get your crap together. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah, I think that realization is really starting to hit. I mean, we had these horrible blood skies over California, right? We had hundreds of people die in mm-hmm. heat waves in these very sort of balmy parts of North America, right? Canada, the Pacific Northwest of Oregon, Portland. And we have these huge superstorms that hit the Gulf Coast and huge flooding in Houston, right? I mean, in some ways, I think people are starting to realize that, the richer you are, the more expensive it's going to be for you, right? And not the other way around.
Yep.
nonetheless, there's sort of a very traditional tight-fistedness in the negotiations, and sort of rich countries feeling like, or poor countries feeling like they didn't contribute to the problem very much, so they should be sort of assisted. And I think the whole thing is very topsy-turvy and unproductive. But that's one of the reasons why it makes a really compelling place to set a book. So I sort of spun this out, and I mean, if anything, if I have sort of one major regret about the book, it's that I didn't just like set the arbitrary year that it set much sooner, right? Because it just feels like since I started working on it in 2018 or so, everything has accelerated a lot in terms of how fast it seems like this stuff is unfolding. So hopefully,
can I ask a question?
Yeah, please.
When you say how fast things are unfolding, do you mean the climate change itself, or do you mean the technology to mitigate climate change, or the
I mean
to mitigate it?
The climate change itself, right? And It's turning out that, one, temperatures are rising, I think, a smidge faster than we predicted, and it's just turning out that we're getting these really terrible effects, like Diane, brought up, and all over the world, at a level of warming that I think previously we had thought would still be kind of okay, right? Like we're at 1.1 C warming, and we're having these like apocalyptic blood skies over the entire west coast of America, having the mega fires and major cities just like practically flooded through. And I think people thought that like, it's going to take a while for us to see those, right? And not until the end of the century are we really going to get, or maybe a few decades. But no, it turns out the climate is just like more sensitive than we thought. Like, and we notice and feel these impacts a lot sooner. So
I spent most of the summer on evacuation alerts. So
yeah,
it's here now.
Yeah, this is our Solarpunk dystopian present, right? That we have to sort of try and find a way through. But yeah, so I set at COP60. I set that at in Buenos Aires, just sort of for semi-arbitrary reasons, but it made a great city as a location for this kind of international diplomatic kind of venture. And I have a common cast of characters in all 5 stories, but in each story, they're in a different scenario, which means they're living different lives, right? Based on the choices that we have made as a society over the next couple decades, right? Really, and really based a lot on the choices that we end up making over just the next like 5 to 8 years, which, the fact that it's such a short, compressed time frame is always really stressful. But I think it's clarifying to use these kinds of scenarios as a way to think about it and say that like, there are going to be people around arguing about this stuff in a couple decades, but whether or not we move on climate transitions is going to shape a lot what is possible for them, and just whether or not they've been able to flourish and thrive. I start off with a scenario that is called the sort of middle of the road scenario. And, that one is kind of designed to feel probably the most what it's like to go to the COP right now. Some of the terms of debate have shifted, but it's really set in that world. They're still just kind of muddling through. And then I switched to it's called SSP5, and it's this kind of like high growth scenario where we burn all the coal and all the fossil fuels in order to power economic development, particularly around the global south and that sort of thing. And this one is in many ways my favorite because it has this kind of, I don't know, like chipper sort of attitude, but that is kind of, I think, papering over as a sort of collective horror at the future that they've all sort of steered into.
And I just want to jump in and say the way that you've written it is very like I don't know. It's like somewhere between like a happy commercial, like what you're saying, and some CEO's PowerPoint. You know what I mean? It's like the language that they use. You know what I mean? Like everything's about like, oh, how's this going to affect my bottom line?
Well, it's a world in which the impulse to do climate action was suppressed and really just killed, right, by the sort of neoliberal ethos, right? And as a result, they're in a world of climate disaster and danger, but the sort of set of values that now I think animate the environmental movement and so forth, like all that has pretty much just sort of been lost culturally. And, I think probably not for everyone, but for our key characters, right? They're these sorts of, in this scenario, there are these hustling entrepreneurs who are trying to make a buck and will sort of lie their way into a deal, and then when the deal falls apart, they'll pivot and being like, well, let's put on a music festival instead, right?
They're kind of like, the characters are kind of bigger assholes in this one too, now that I'm thinking about it.
But they're obsessed with brands and fashion, and in some ways, their lives are not too bad, right? Because there's just a lot of money around. When there's just a lot of money sort of swirling around, because that you've derived either through financialization or because you have this really cheap fossil energy flowing, that does like give you certain advantages, right?
Sure.
But I think, on the whole, I hope that readers can come away from that one with a sense of like, oh, I don't actually want to go there. Like, it's a little bit of a nightmare.
I honestly feel like this is the second most realistic one, because they're also realistic though in some ways. Every single one of them, I feel like, oh, this is the way that we're going to go. No, this one's definitely the way that we're going to go. But it's just like, I feel like in some ways, working for a corporation myself, I'm already living that to some degree. So the next one you do is kind of like, it's more about the rich-poor divide, I feel like. It was more of like a class thing. So why don't you talk about that one for a minute?
Yeah, SSP4 is the inequality scenario, yes. Right? It's one in which some progress gets made on climate mitigation, right? Reducing emissions, but it's just harder to pay for the adaptation. And so the climate impacts have a very different and a very divided result based on, whether or not you live in a poor country or a rich country, whether or not you're a poor person or a poor or a rich person. This was one where I'm sort of nudging at the framework a little bit, right? Because all of these kind of I end up taking towards my own interpretation. Mm-hmm. But, I think the IPCC has really, for the most part, crafted its sense of inequality around nation states, right? And sense that and they say that there kind of are rich countries and there are poor countries, mm-hmm. right? And that is very much the sort of mindset, I think, at the COP amongst the parties, right? Because all the parties are nation states or people representing them. And, more and more, I think there is scholarship that says that as much as there's a divide between rich and poor countries, there's a bigger divide between rich people and poor people, right? Mm-hmm. Or rich people and the rest of us, right? Even if we're not poor by some metrics. But, I was reading about inequality in Buenos Aires, and there was this like very potent story I read about a gated compound community for the rich people, literally by virtue of how they had designed their drainage, flooding their neighbors when there was some sort of minor storms or flooding. And I think that helps us see a little bit beyond, like, they both live in the same city, they're both a part of the same country, but their climate outcomes are just going to be very different, right? So the whole thing, it was an attempt to explore kind of the materiality of inequality, right? Like what that means in terms of how a place is constructed, because I think the inequality is felt on both sides of that divide, right? It kind of leads to particular neuroses that you can see in how a place is built, and so it's definitely kind of like it's the most action-packed of them, actually, in some ways, right? Because it's got a sort of a kidnapping plot that takes you out of the sort of the cop compound.
I'd also say it's the most cyberpunk of them.
Yeah. There's definitely I think a sense of that there are these sorts of looming megacorps and these kind of almost beyond human plutocrats out there who live in this very high-tech environment. And then you have these sorts of people in the street who are kind of hacking things together, and in some ways are very savvy and can totally overcome some of the resource inequities, but only in these very sharp and occasionally like nasty ways, right?
Yeah. And then your last one is, I just call it war. And damn, this one honestly is the scariest one in my opinion. It is like my worst nightmare.
Yeah, the SSP3, they give it in the sort of scholarly narratives a very not that scary sounding name of regional rivalry. But, for me, and I think most people who engage with these models, it represents sort of a breakdown of trying to do anything on a planetary scale, right? And I don't know. I mean, I think we're seeing a resurgence of just military conflict recently with this insane invasion of Ukraine. But, then there's also a lot of ways in which it seems like that has provoked a kind of unity, which does not seem to be the case in this scenario, right? And, where, you have a movement of globalized nationalists, I call them the GLONATs, who, even though they are as networked and a part of a sort of international movement as anyone, find the notion of institutions like the UN or the IPCC or the UNFCCC, any of these sort of attempts to kind of push through national sovereignty and ethno-nationalism to try and create to fix our global problems, right? They find that important, so they've kind of torn it all down, and it's scary. But most of the story ends up with just people holed up in the bar because there's a storm outside and there's like drones flying around shooting people, and so they sort of use that as an opportunity to dissect some of what went wrong, which of course, from our perspective here, 30 years prior, at the origin story of all these scenarios, right, is like, what is going wrong or about to go wrong, right? Or like, what is our problem we have to fix? And then of course there's the last one which is the hopeful scenario, which is the SSP1, the sustainability scenario, which is kind of Solarpunk. It's kind of also, sort of Green New Deal fiction, right? Sort of shows like a majoritarian turn towards a kind of transition, kind of community ethos and design ethos, and away from capitalism and towards a kind of planetary planned economy in a gradual way. I mean, I think it's sort of a debate for them whether or not there was a revolution or whether all these things just kind of happened inevitably.
And I will say, even though that's the most utopian one, things are not perfect. There are still problems.
Yeah. I mean, what unites all of these stories is that Buenos Aires gets hit by a superstorm, right? And so that, that still happens and they have to deal with it. But the way there's disaster recovery is this really tricky art and area of study, and the outcomes you get will vary drastically depending on how prepared you are and what your infrastructure was like, and what kind of attitudes leaders and communities take going into it. So that was a piece I really wanted to explore in that section.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you to put on your futurist hat here.
Yeah.
And tell me which one of these. Well, first of all, which one of these scares you the most? I'm just curious. And secondly, which one do you think is the most realistic outcome?
Oh, yeah. And you can't ask me to pick one, right? Because the whole point is that these are all facets of what is already happening,
yeah.
Right? It is easy to sort of we could imagine swerving into sort of one quadrant of this graph space or another, but what really the question is like, where are we going to coalesce, right?
Uh-huh.
Because all of this is kind of already exists in our climate discourse and how we approach the problem, right? The inequality, the profiteering, the sort of just mediocre human behavior, the ways in which conflict and nationalism stymie the progress we need, and a beautiful, incredibly imaginative effort to radically rethink human life, right? Like all those are happening at once. And, it's a question of where we choose to coalesce.
Mm-hmm.
So, these are, they're not, even when the IPCC uses them, right? They're not meant to be predictions, right? The whole point of creating these scenarios is so that you don't have to offer one prediction, right? These are choices.
Right.
Obviously, you've done a lot of research in this area, and I have not. So I am interested in the conclusions that you've come to based on what you're seeing. And, actually, that was a really cool segment for me because I feel like I have more hope than I have from an outside perspective. A lot of it just all seems like everybody is looking to their own backyard. And by nature, we cannot solve this problem that way. When we first started reacting to the pandemic globally, I had a lot of hope. I saw a lot of people coming together and a lot of nations coming together to try to solve what is a global problem.
Yeah.
And over the course of the pandemic, I watched all that break down, right? And but the good stuff we did was still good, right? And I kept saying, if we just applied this to climate change, recognizing it for the urgency that it has, then we'd have this. We're smart.
Yeah.
We can do this.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, then you see it only takes one asshole to wreck it all, right?
Yeah, I think, I don't know, I was listening to a talk with Stan Robinson, right, who did a in some ways, very similar book, right, Ministry for the Future. It's not bigger than my book. It goes into a lot more stuff, but it kind of is, similarly nested in the UNFCCC process and the kind of real world debates happening around climate and all these sorts of entangled issues. And he said that he's actually like more optimistic than when he started the book because COVID just like sped everything up, right? Like, even though it seems like, oh my God, my life is so slow and it seems like we've just been in this mire of the pandemic, in many ways, it has like loosed a willingness to act on things among some of the big actors in ways that are hard to see in the news. So
fair enough.
But I don't know. I mean, I also feel like Stan's book, which I think is very brilliant, but is like the catalyst in many ways, is like a heat wave in India that kills like 20 million people, and we've got 1 million dead Americans from COVID, and nobody is blinking. So I do kind of wonder if like now such an event we would be kind of too desensitized to it to force us to change our ways. But all this stuff is up for grabs. I mean, like you said, there's this kind of looking towards our own backyards. Remember the adage, like, think global, act local, right? People are like, see the problems in the world, and then like go and just like help your community. I actually think that we got to turn that around. Right? We have to think local and act global. We have to like examine the impacts of climate change and all these other sorts of the poly crisis, I sometimes hear it called, on our communities and our lives, and then go with that understanding to an international, to a planetary level, and demand solutions on that scale.
I think you're absolutely right. You bring up something, right? Okay, back in the I don't remember exactly. I think it was 1990, around there. There was a nationwide thing here in Canada about a round table on the environment. And they consulted a variety of different groups. Of course, one of them was business and corporations, which they probably shouldn't have bothered with. But one thing, well, I say that cynically, but it has to. We have to include them in the scenario for everything to work, right? One of the groups they consulted was high school students. And I was, your teachers suggested, put different students forward. I went to this thing, right? And our recommendations were all on education, right? Because of course we're in the school system. We know how school works. We're like, okay, what you need to do is you need to start reaching out to people in school and educate them about what we're looking at and what the results will be if we don't get our crap together, and how we can help to get our crap together. And we should do things on the ground in school that actively do that, make sure everybody has a recycling program, this kind of stuff, right? And I saw this in action when my own son entered the school system. I was delighted to see that some of the things that we had directly recommended were being applied to the school system that he was now entering. I saw our fingerprints on it. I was like, that's great. I was so excited, but it's not enough, right? I thought in my optimism of my youth that if people could really see the consequences, that they would want to just naturally get it together. But it's really not true. Mm-hmm. People get caught up in our own, that's fine, but we have to survive now. Well, yes, we have to survive now, but we have to survive then too. And everything we do has to bring that together. And, I get so frustrated. Again, that's been in my face in the pandemic. You think, okay, look, we're going to give you the figures and the facts, and hopefully you can make a decision that's, wise based on that information, right? But people don't, right? People react emotionally. They deny. They refuse to accept what they're looking at. They ascribe, to me, it's weird, negative purposes to things that are genuinely intended to help people. And I don't even know where to start. So I guess that's my question. What's the next move here for us, right? What can we do now? Me, you, right? I'm not the CEO of a corporation. I'm not my local MP. Like, what can I do now?
Oh, it's a good question. And it sounds like you have a sense that part of the problem here is epistemological, right? That there are just people out there who see the world very differently than you see the world, right? And
absolutely, yeah. And we need to include these people, yeah.
I think there is an epistemological crisis, but I also, I try and be like a good Marxist materialist and say, like, the best way to change people's minds is to change people's material life, right? Mm-hmm. Material conditions. And if it's like, I try, even though I'm in the business of writing stories about climate change, and that I do hope have an impact on how people see the world and see their role in it. I try not to get too caught up in some of the sense that like we need to change hearts and minds, and because I think in some ways that lets like people with power off the hook, right? And
yeah, I do too.
For those of us who don't have power, we are the ones who let people off the hook or no, right? So I think there's just got to be a lot less, letting off the hook of the people who make decisions and keep choosing easy decisions that don't cause any problems for those who have money and power and profit streams they have to protect, right?
Right.
But I don't know, like politics everywhere is very broken. Everyone's got their brain broken by the pandemic in one way or another.
It's true. I'm a very different person than I was at the beginning.
If I had the answer, I would have put it in the book. But the answer is there's got to be some kind of collective upheaval, and how you actually create that is the largest challenge of human existence.
Yeah, fair enough. And how you do it without body counts and lots of them is also the challenge, right? Because that never solves things ultimately. We have our myths about revolutions, and revolutions are important because it shows, we're not going to take it, right? It's what it shows. But revolutions, if they're bloody and violent, generally end up with some dictator making the situation worse after everything has gone to hell, right? And I'm, like we don't have time for that right now, I feel.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough, right? Because clearly we do need some kind of break with the politics of the status quo, but you're right, they're very fragile. I mean, I was always like a big Bernie guy, right? And Bernie was always very careful to say that what he wanted was a political revolution, right? He wanted it to take place within the sort of the bounds of politics and civil society as we practice them in America, and we would enact the revolutionary program via democracy, right? Via voting for it together, and I think that has to be a part of it. Mm-hmm. And I think probably the other part, the sort of, it's not bloodless, but it is a nonviolent tactic, right? Is like, it's going to take a lot of strikes, right? In the end, it's all about organizing people along the axis in which they can actually exert power against systems that control the resources of the world. And the way we exert power is as workers and via withholding our labor, because that's what makes all these systems run.
I like what you have to say there. Yep. Cool. Because I've been thinking along the same lines. It's good to know that someone who has done this kind of research is on that page. That's encouraging to me.
So you think all these unions and all these strikes that are happening right now, you think this is headed kind of in a positive direction? I
don't know. There's definitely some upsurge. But it's an upsurge that started with the labor movement at the absolute nadir of its historical power from the last couple of centuries, and that that's not good. That makes it really hard. But I think that if you're going to look for hope, like look for it in the labor movement and the ways in which, particularly the pandemic, has shaped how people view themselves as workers and whether or not they're getting like a good shake, right? I mean, so yeah, I mean, you asked like what can you do as like, or we as like a small number of people? Well, I mean, if you have a job, like start a union, join a union, right? It doesn't matter what your workplace is, doesn't matter what your job is. That's a good start. And if you don't have a job, I don't know, maybe like see if there's a Starbucks nearby that you can start salting, right? I mean, it's tough, right? Because a lot of people, I think, who listen to podcasts like this are like me, who just want to sort of fiddle with, imaginary words on a screen all day. And, I'm not necessarily going out and taking my own advice on this all the time, but the more of that we can make happen, like the closer we can get to getting us closer to that general climate strike, the better shot we have.
Yeah. I will say, though, and I give this advice to myself often, and other people give me this advice too, is you can't always be on, if you know what I mean. You can't always be the one who's out there fighting the fight every minute of every day, because you will burn out. And you have to find a way that works for you.
Well, you got to find other people. The way that we can prevent burnout is not by individually doing less, but by sharing the burdens, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And it can be really hard to do that, especially because the pandemic has atomized us by like an order of magnitude. But that is really the strategy, right? Is find other people who are willing to try and fix the thing with you, and then you're not fixing it alone.
Cool.
Okay. So we were talking about fiddling with imaginary worlds. I want to talk about that real quick because we're coming up on time here.
Sure.
And you mentioned Kim Stanley Robinson, who is very clearly, to me, a big influence on you. Because, I mean, your book is just like, it just partners with Ministry of the Future perfectly. I just recently read that, but I don't know, 3 months ago maybe. And then I read your book, within 2 or 3 books of it. And I was like, oh my God.
Yeah. Stan is his work is a big influence on me, and we correspond occasionally. And but I do think I finished my book before he finished his book. But of course, he had a book contract, so things started moving on publishing ministry before I found a publisher for mine. But I think they go together pretty well.
So what I was going to ask you was, who else influences you, and what are some other Solarpunk writers that people should look for?
Over the pandemic, I did like a deep dive on China Mayville, and a lot of his work. I mean, that stuff is so brilliant. So his work has definitely like influenced me a bunch in recent years. I had read a few books before the pandemic, and I mean, he's also like a Marxist scholar, right? So I think kind of trying to write what is inherently a bourgeois form of the novel, but break it out of that entirely bourgeois sensibility is kind of there in his work. And I kind of work on that a little bit too. Let's see who else. Malka Older's infomocracy books are like very wonky, but like make politics and elections and debates really engaging, and so I love those.
I am so not surprised to hear you say that, because I literally have in my notes right in front of my face Kim Stanley Robinson, Malka Older.
Yeah. Bruce Sterling, he, a lot of his fiction and nonfiction, I think, has always been and inspired me to be kind of very interested in the intersections of technology, politics, culture, right? And envision social change not just as a process of getting new technology and discovering new things, but of these like long histories playing forward, right? The future is a kind of history that hasn't happened yet, sort of stuff, right? And Ursula Le Guin, right?
Yes.
I think has is probably for a lot of people the proto Solarpunk author, right? Like if she was alive today, she would be writing Solarpunk, probably, maybe, in terms of trying to embody and bring to life these radical imaginaries of how politics and how people could work differently, right? Which I think is a big part of the project. Yeah, I mean, there's lots of people I admire. Paolo Bacigalupi, he's done such good work in the sort of climate fiction space, both in creating these like really harrowing, sort of cautionary tales, and in sort of showing futures in which climate change happened. And yeah, I mean, it's like not a good situation, but it's very interesting. And you feel that there is a continuance of history, right? That the disaster is not reduced to this sort of singular thing, but is in fact a constant of people arguing and debating and jockeying for position. So I think all of those kind of probably bring into some of how I approach at least this book, Our Shared Storm. And yeah,
I'm pleased that you're including both aspects of it. And I'm also very pleased you mentioned Ursula Le Guin. I don't think she gets enough credit for her influence on the genre. So that's really cool. She totally is the GOAT. She absolutely is the GOAT. Yeah, no question.
Well, she's the GOAT, right? I mean, she's the greatest science fiction author of all time. I don't think that's particularly in dispute. Yeah, I think, a lot of Solarpunk work is in some ways just trying to kind of rediscover or recreate or kind of reclaim for our moment stuff that she was doing decades ago. So, but every generation has to do that for themselves. So,
and I think she's been having quite a resurgence. I gotta be honest, when I started reading science fiction, I mean, she was known and everything, of course, and had popular books, but lately, maybe it's just the people that I hang out with and talk to online, but I feel like every other word is Le Guin. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I feel like she's going through a major resurgence right now.
Then that's good. If that's true, then I'm all for it. We need her right now.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Question for you, Andrew, and then we got to wrap up. But I'm curious. You mentioned Kim Stanley Robinson. You mentioned Malka Older. And then your book all makes me feel like there's this new kind of hard science fiction that's starting to come out. That's like hard political science fiction, if you will. It's very wonky, like you were saying. It talks about things like banks, and monetary systems and how that changes things. And it talks about, are you seeing that too? Is this something that you're feeling out there?
I think, very possibly. It's certainly the part of science fiction that I've always been drawn to the most. I'm not an engineer or I'm not technical in most ways, right? And I think, at one point, hard science fiction was often the domain of people who kind of in their day jobs were, working with numbers and working with doing research, and you had a lot of that play out. But in some of the sort of early science fiction visions of just kind of what is possible physically in the universe, right? Let's take a weird sort of spacey concept and explore that, right? But there was, I think, a political bent to that, right? I mean, you had some of that in Asimov, right? There's a lot of it's not my cup of tea, but it is all sort of very political. I don't know. I think perhaps there is a sense at some point that the outcomes we were getting as a society were not necessarily linking up with the progress we were making technologically, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Like you were saying, a lot of the original hard science fiction folks, or even the people who write what you classically call as hard science fiction now, they're like engineers, mathematicians.
Yeah, the Andy Weir kind of type.
Physicists, you know what I mean? And to some degree, that I think that even happened in computer science. But I feel like it's happening around maybe it's just around, maybe it's around climate change or something, but with Malcolm.
Politics, economics is what you're saying?
Politics and economics and how that plays into the environment and things like that. Let's use Malka as an example. You've got her super wonky Infomocracy where she talks about a different kind of democracy in extreme detail and how that would work, right? Or Ministry for the Future. Well, all of Kim Stanley Robinson's stuff is hard science fiction, really, but that one in particular, I feel like breaks some new ground, at least for me. Well, not even necessarily, because in the Mars trilogy, he kind of did it too, where he kind of really got into politics in a hard science fiction kind of way. Okay, if we were to make a new kind of government, what would that look like? You know what I mean?
Stan's been writing books to yell at bankers for some time now. And more power to him. I mean, we need every one of those we can get.
But I don't know. This is just something that occurred to me the other day when I was preparing for this, that it seems like to me there's a new kind of hard science fiction kind of coming together, coalescing sort of around Solarpunk. A lot of it is authors who aren't directly related to Solarpunk, but are kind of on the outskirts or have influenced Solarpunk in some way, or, I don't know.
I guess one thing I'll say to bring it back to Le Guin, right? I have occasionally seen her work referred to not as science fiction, but as anthropological fiction, right? In that it's not actually that concerned with speculating about technology and science, right? I mean, she makes up gadgets. She's got the Ansible, right? There's that's in there, but she's really interested in speculating about, human culture, right? And so I actually, I'll use the term science fiction willy-nilly, but I tend to think of myself not as a science fiction writer. I tend to think of myself as a speculative fiction writer, because I think that's like a bigger bubble that includes science fiction, but also includes other ways of imagining the future and speculating that put down the science fiction theory of social change, which is that you will have a new scientific discovery or create a new technology, and then you play out those ramifications on society and pick up another set of theories of social change, right? That it's about politics, it's about democracy, it's about class struggle, it's about climate change, right? That most of our lives over the next 100 years are not going to be determined by the impacts of whatever new technology gets invented, but are going to be determined by the impacts of the climate, right? It was like, Diane, you were under these evacuation orders, right? Like, we're talking asthma rates, we're talking, house prices and insurance prices, gas prices.
I just bought a house. I can relate to that.
The things that determine our lives are going to be more and more dominated by the impacts of the warming climate, right? And so that's just like one theory, but I think there's a whole host of them, right? And Malka's work is the same. I mean, she also creates some great sort of imaginary technologies, but isn't focused on them as like the thing that makes this world possible. She's focused on changes in the political system, right? That we can make regardless of whether or not we invent XYZ gadgets, right?
Okay, so we got to wrap this up. Question we ask everybody: what is giving you hope right now?
What is giving me hope right now? I should come prepared for this one. It's a small thing, but a Starbucks store not far from me voted to unionize. Right? I mean, that's one of the
awesome,
and they're going store by store, but that's one of the biggest employers in the country. Well, like the 12th largest or something like that, and that's really exciting. And I think, another thing that gives me hope is, there does seem to be a cresting interest in Solarpunk and the things it can do to help us figure out some of our core problems. And I just see every day I'm seeing more and more people I've never even heard of from different sectors finding their way into this space and kind of thinking. And, that's kind of what the genre is like predicated on, that you would have a lot of people decide to engage in visionary thinking and create a counterculture that might be able to do some good. So yeah, I'll leave it there.
Great. Thanks for that.
Awesome.
Okay. And where can we find all of your cool stuff that you're making and doing?
Yeah. The best way to follow my work is to sign up for my newsletter. You can go to solarshades.club and sign up there. It's free. You can also find just a lot of links to various stories and essays and things I've done in the past on my website, which is andrewdanahudson.com. And yeah, if you want to buy my book, comes out April 5th. So probably by the time people hear this, will already be out. And you can go to sharedstorm.com and that'll link to the publisher's website. And if your readers get to this before, I think, the end of June, they can get 30% off. They use the code STORM30 when ordering it from the publisher. But you can also order it in like any other bookstores. Please get it from your libraries, right? So yeah, I think that's about it.
Awesome.
So thanks so much for coming on. We appreciate your time.
Definitely.
Yeah, no, this was so much fun. I really appreciate you guys inviting me.
All right, and we are back. So before we talk a little more about that interview, if you like what we're doing, be sure you share us with all your friends, Facebook, Twitter, in person, if people do that anymore. Go ahead and rate and review our podcast anywhere that you listen to us. That would be awesome. That helps us out as well. And if you really like what we're doing, you can check us out on patreon.com/ifthisgoeson. And we've got all kinds of tiers there. You can listen to me rant about books for 5 minutes every now and then. Our patrons can vote for future guests. We just wrapped one of those up not too long ago. There's discounts to the Rambo School for Wayward Writers and a bunch of other stuff. So please go and check that out. If you're not into doing the monthly donation type thing, we also have a Ko-fi account. That's Ko-fi. And you can just go and search If This Goes On, and we'll come right up. So go ahead and please check that stuff out. Help us out. We could use it.
I just bought a new house. I have a mortgage to pay. Help me out.
Yes. And as I said at the beginning of this episode, I am buying a new car. Please send us money.
That brings us right back into the interview, because I was really feeling what Andrew had to say there about how, climate and all of this has an effect on house prices. Mm-hmm. Okay, we tapped out every resource we had. We begged our parents for money. There are 4 of us who are all adults, right? And we've been a stable, kind of unorthodox family unit, right? For some time. And sometime being more than 10 years. And we're buying it is a duplex, and it is just enough for all of us. And it cost $500,000.
Oh my God.
Right? And that was, we made the down payment, but we've been saving for years. There were inheritances involved. There was a trust involved from Aaron's accident, and every resource, we'll have nothing left. That just cleans out everything we've got to do this. This is, and I'm 47 years old as of a couple of days ago, and this should not be the case, right?
Yeah.
This should not be what is happening right now in the world. People are going, oh, wow, but at least you have a house. Yes, I do now. And that makes me very, very lucky. But I have lived in squalor for a long time to save the money to do this. Yeah. And this should not be the way of the world right now. It needs to change.
Yeah. The only reason my wife and I were able to afford a house when we did is because we were in a recession, and Obama did that deal where if you bought a house, you got, I forget how much it was, like $10,000 or something. And my wife and I were we barely have enough money for any down payment. And even with this deal, let's just do it. And we bought this tiny little house that barely fit all of us. You know what I mean? And needed a ton of repairs, which mostly it didn't get. And then, we paid off on that house for a long time, sold it, and bought the house that we currently live in, which is still in need of repairs. But it fits everybody at least.
That's good.
But yeah, it's crazy. And things were bad before, and they're just getting worse, I guess is where I'm going with this.
Yeah, that's what I was getting at too, right? The fact that an ordinary person should be able to find shelter.
Yeah.
Part of the reason why we bought was that we could not afford rent anymore.
Wow.
Right? Because rent in our area is $1,000 a month more than the mortgage we're going to have to pay.
Oh yeah. I believe it. I look around just out of curiosity sometimes, and rent for a little apartment is more than our mortgage for a 3-story house that we have. Where I live, all houses are tall because we live in hills and mountains, so that you can't spread out. Everything has to be straight up.
I don't know what the people who are holding the levers of power expect the ordinary person to do. And I don't really understand their model. You know, it must all entirely be based on stocks and speculation because the average person cannot afford to buy things anymore.
Yeah. It is sadly true. And even though we've been pushing the Patreon a lot more lately, you know, that's why I thought we should not do it for the first year. We should just.
Yeah. And you're right. And I agree with you because people don't have a lot of money for extras right now. No. I certainly don't. I get it. You know, and the thing is, you and I are really very fortunate. We count among the global wealthy comparatively. You know, we live in G8 countries and we actually will be able to, or are affording our own house barely, but we are. And we're among, you know, the Eloi, you know, like that's not right.
Yeah.
That's not right.
Yeah, it isn't right. It isn't right. So what else about the interview stood out to you?
You know what, like I was saying at the time, it does actually encourage me because sometimes this all seems so complex and so overwhelming, and it's really helpful to have someone kind of put it in perspective and go, okay, these are the problems. Yeah. These are the choices we can make to fix these problems. And if we collectively push, demanding our economic rights as well as our environmental and social rights, then we can make lasting change. And I think he's right. I think we're starting to see more of it. I think for a long time, environmentalism was seen as like rich hippie stuff, you know, like Whole Foods kind of crap. But it's not about that. It's about the working class. It's about the blue collar, like me, you know, like you.
I would probably be considered white collar, to be honest. But I did grow up
barely, though, maybe.
I did grow up in a fairly blue collar family where, you know, my grandfather was a steel worker, you know, and my grandfather on the other side was a teacher. So I don't know if teacher is considered blue collar or white collar, but they're about as blue collar as white collar gets, whatever they are.
Yeah. Yeah. My dad was a foreman at a dairy plant, right? So yeah, very blue collar. Yeah. It feels to me like our conversation has been a bit over the map today, but I also feel that it's important because that's the thing about this issue. It's not one thing. If you recycle, you haven't solved the problem. It's a multifaceted issue that involves every aspect of our lives, and we should realize how they all connect. And that obviously is some of the work that Andrew is doing, and that's great. We need more of that.
Absolutely. All right, let's wind this up. I will say before we quit, though, next time we get him on, we need to talk about his writing a little more. We didn't get a chance to talk about the different ways that he did his little different scenarios, which was a really cool thing. Other than me making it sound like a CEO's PowerPoint, which I kind of like regret the way I described that now, but it is actually interesting, and everybody should go check it out for real.
Yeah, and style is important because style can communicate things through subtext that you can't communicate through the overt plot or the characters. So that's cool that he's explored that, and that makes me want to read the book alone, never mind the fact that I support the work.
Yes, and it is a very cool book. It is very interesting, and all you Solarpunks out there who are listening to this should definitely go and check that out immediately. Okay, with that said, coming up next in our audio column, I'm finally doing some book reviews.
All right.
Yeah. So hang in there for some book reviews by yours truly.
Can't wait to hear it.
Thanks for listening, everybody, and we'll see you again soon.
Thanks for tuning in, guys.
Hello, everybody, and I am back with another set of reviews. This time we have 3 reviews. The first one is The Year's Best Speculative Fiction 2021 by Oghenechevwe Donald Eckpeki, published by Jembefola Press. I read this one the first second I could, of course, and wow, there's just so much good stuff in here. I will get to all that in a minute, but first I want to ask, why the hell have we not had something like this before? Publishers, where are you? Why does this man have to do all this work himself? Oghenechevwe even put together his own small press for this anthology specifically. Why did it take until 2021 for a best of anthology to come out and recognize an entire goddamn continent? So maybe this isn't the freshest take around, but it's an important one and we all need to take a second to consider it. So now that my rant is over, let me start talking about the book by saying, damn, I love this cover. Good job. These stories cover the entire range of speculative fiction from horror to science fiction to fantasy and even some magic realism in there. It delves deeply into folklore that I'm not familiar with, which makes me love it even more. This is precisely how I fell in love with Chinese science fiction and fantasy, and now I'm beginning to feel that way about African science fiction and fantasy as well. As I was reading, I marked about 14 stories that I wanted to discuss in this review, which is damn near half the book. I've read a lot of great anthologies over the years, but there are few in which I marked 14 stories to talk about. So it was a struggle to narrow that down and figure out what I really wanted to talk about. And since the review for this book is already starting to get a little bit long, I just decided to choose two. The first is a horror story called The Goat Keeper's Harvest by Toby Ungundaran. This story is a wonderful bit of folk horror that involves a cursed village and demonic goats. I really loved everything about it. The atmosphere, the suddenness of the horror, the mystery, and, I could go on. I felt like it was one of those scary stories that you were told as a kid when you were camping out. It was just awesome. The second one I want to talk about is called The Thought Box by Tlotlo Samasi. And I hope I'm pronouncing that name correctly. Apologies if I'm not. In this story, a woman slowly realizes her boyfriend is not the great guy that she thought he was. Then he buys a thought box so they can read each other's thoughts and be truly honest with each other. And it turns out appearances are deceiving in more ways than one. Great story, super thought out, fantastic science fiction. Highly, highly, highly recommended. There are a ton of other great stories in here by notable writers, including Tobias Buckell, ZZ Claiborne, Cherie Renee Thomas, and Eugen Bacon, and lots of great authors that I didn't recognize. I highly, highly recommend this one for anyone who's interested in science fiction, fantasy from around the world. Okay, so the second one we're going to talk about is called The Withered King by Ricardo Victoria by Artemesia Publishing, and this one was published in 2019. This is one that's been sitting on my stack for a long time, and I wish I had gotten to it earlier. It's an action-packed adventure story with magic, spaceships, friendship, and questionable parenting, all packed in between fight scenes. I honestly want to say that this is the modern version of an Edgar Rice Burroughs story. Each action-packed scene leads right into another scene of adventure or fighting, and it lets up just enough for you to find out a bit about the world or the characters, and then just starts all over again. This novel is also heavily flavored by video games, which I think enhances the serialized feel of the chapters, replicating that constant move from one adventure or battle to the next. The story finds a legendary warrior as he comes out of retirement to help his friends, who is the CEO of a tech company. As they begin to unravel the mystery, they also begin to build a community of fellow warriors. These warriors are known for their special powers they have received because of near-death experiences. And of course, there's some background to that. These powers also tend to attract the legendary Tempest Blades, who always manage to find a way to those chosen warriors. As the events of the novels progress, they find they are haunted by events of the past in more ways than one. The characters themselves could be from your favorite RPG. There's a legendary retired warrior, as I've already mentioned, a musician and assassin, a genius student of physics who is also an archer, and a lizard man, engineer / pilot. Character depth, I will say, is a little bit limited due to the amount of action, but the characters do grow throughout the novel. I believe it kind of adds to that RPG feel. If you like the sound of all of this, Victoria just came out with a sequel. I'd suggest this for anyone who likes RPG lit, action, and sci-fantasy settings. Okay, our third book. This one is called Missing Signal by Seb Doubinsky, published by Meerkat Press in 2018. So back in episode 18, I reviewed The Invisible by Seb Doubinsky. Missing Signal technically fits just before The Invisible in the City States series and is first within the Vita sub-series. So this one takes place before the one I reviewed before, is what I'm trying to say. In this novel, Terrence, a government agent in charge of disinformation around UFOs, falls into a plot by aliens to free Earth from the threat of a second alien race. The characters within Missing Signal veer from a mutually agreed upon reality to a world of paranoia designed to question what is real. This novel is like if Glenn Deaton wrote The X-Files, with a dash of Philip K. Dick to keep it spicy. The book is short, and likewise, the cast of characters is very small. In fact, it is nearly a character study of Terrence as he goes from creating conspiracy theories to becoming involved in one. As before, Doubinsky has a straightforward style, not wasting time in overwrought descriptions and unnecessary adornments, with an entire chapter sometimes consisting of a couple sentences. Seb's work shines in the same way Philip K. Dick's work does, but loses the misogyny and improves the prose. Check this book out if you like quick reads, conspiracy theories, and spies, and straightforward prose. Alright, so that's it for reviews this time around. I hope you all go and check these books out. Feel free to message me any way that you can. I'm usually on Twitter. Let me know what you think. Thanks. If This Goes On, Don't Panic is edited by Alan Bailey with production by Jasmine Geelig. Our theme music is by Father Flamethrower, additional music by Christopher Snydrowski, and outro music by Sable Aradia. Intro by David Robinson. A special thanks to our guest, Andrew Dana Hudson. Thanks for supporting us, and we'll see you again soon.